Are you tired of the weekly reports of police brutality, unjustified killings of unarmed civilians, especially young people of color, by police? I think we all are. Last summer, we all watched in horror as police snuffed the life out of George Floyd, completely, senselessly, unnecessarily, unjustifiably. And as a result, there were widespread protests throughout the nation and throughout the world because the injustice was clear for all to see. Police budgets have grown way out of proportion to public safety needs, which has contributed to excesses of police brutality. And it's time to divert some of those funds to social services and other resources which will make our communities safer and healthier. Police brutality is a systemic problem. As the National Catholic Reporter says, clearly it's time to retire the few bad apples argument when it comes to police brutality. The number and pervasiveness of incidents of excessive force indicate a systemic problem. A problem and a systemic problem requires a systemic solution. It's not enough to focus on the individuals or even on the training. We need to look at the system as a whole. Police budgets are out of control while social services are underfunded. According to The Nation, the ever-increasing amount of money spent on policing bears little relationship to crime rates. The crime rate rose between 1960 and 1980, and police budgets increased, but then when the crime rate began to decrease, and decreased significantly by 2018, spending on police still continued to steadily increase throughout that entire time span. Meanwhile, our social services are severely limited by budgetary constraints and cuts. And the hobbled services have barely been able to respond effectively to a pandemic, standing in sharp contrast to the heavy resources used by police to quell the protests of last summer and recently. Big city jails are serving as mental health facilities, and police are being called upon to deal with mental health crises, with homelessness, and other social situations and problems with which they're ill-equipped to deal, that they're really not designed to deal with these issues. Defunding the police is one of the solutions that has been proposed. Some are calling for the total abolition of police. Others are calling for police reform, such as changes in training and policies. I would agree with the calls for defunding the police partially in order to divert some of those resources to social services, human services that are going to ultimately make our communities safer and be more effective. According to The Nation, defunding the police was one of the 6 policy platforms put forward by the Movement for Black Lives in 2016, and since the protests about George Floyd, calls for defunding the police have become more widespread and gone more mainstream. According to The Economist, when it comes to reforming the police, there's a limit to what Congress can do or the federal government can do because America's 18,000 law enforcement agencies are governed locally. So therefore, most reforms need to happen at the local level. There are some examples of positive reforms that have been done at the local level. For example, according to the National Catholic Reporter, Camden, New Jersey, routinely described as one of the most violent cities in the country, saw its crime rate drop by close to half after it radically reformed its police department in 2012, primarily to address police corruption. Camden adopted community-oriented policing, which focuses on working with residents to solve problems rather than on violence and punishment. In addition, I recently heard that Newark, New Jersey has also implemented radical reforms resulting in 0 shootings by police in 2020 and no increase in the crime rate, such as happened in many other cities. At the local and national levels, we need to reflect on our values and priorities and reallocate our resources accordingly. We need to stop using the excuse of limited resources for allowing critical human services to deteriorate and allowing income inequalities to increase beyond reasonable extent, to the point where people feel the need to use the police to maintain and restore order and to protect their property. Instead, we need to procure the common good and invest in human potential, reserving law enforcement for those limited situations when it is really necessary, and reducing its excessive and dangerous footprint in our society. So let's advocate for budgetary reforms at every level of government, carefully scrutinizing police budgets to determine where they can safely be cut, and generally resist most calls for them to increase. Instead, invest in community services that will make our communities healthier and safer for all. Thank you.